My name is Geoff Darcy. I'm an acupuncturist and herbalist at the Darcy Wellness Clinic in Natick. And with me today in the studio is Dr. Judy Dempewolff. Welcome, Judy. And Dan Cohen, both therapists. And we're here to talk about relationships. 50% of relationships crash and burn and they don't work. And that must cause a great deal of pain for everybody.
It does. And some of it's preventable. And what I do is try to help people find tools to work with in their relationships to break out of bad patterns that couples get into.
So that women create more emotional intimacy through talk and through self-disclosure. Is that generally what women are good at?
Yes, and that's what they expect in a good relationship. For men, it is often, this is not always, but often around activity and intimacy. To some men, it's about sexual intimacy. For a woman, she'd rather talk first and then make love. For a man, it's the other way around. So that alone is...
So you get two different perspectives coming together. You know, men are from women are from Venus, men are from Mars.
Something like that.
Like this classic thing of different perspectives.
Different perspectives, different needs.
Yes. As a therapist there, how much of your own practice is involved in helping people with tools for relationships?
I would almost say 100%.
So if it's not your wife, it's your mother or your
or
father
your child or
some kind of relationship.
Yeah.
There are warning signals to when a relationship is not working. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, John Gottman did a lot of research on couples where he would hook them up to sensory indicators and get them talking and eventually arguing about a topic that was hot for them, and see what would predict the couple being more likely to separate. And what he found was couples could argue and it would be fine, but the couples for whom they had physiological arousal, their heart rate would go up and their skin conductivity would be more, they would be much more likely to separate in 3 years.
So that would be a predictor within a 3-year period.
Yeah.
And is that kind of underlying it? There's a deeper psycho-emotional issue bubbling below the surface that really triggers them and sets them off into a stress response like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that deep stress response is just unbearable and they react?
It's too hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Other couples can argue and squabble with no problem.
A little bit about the family of origin and the kind of inherited emotional DNA that gets passed down the line.
Well, I mean, we're working from a whole body healing perspective, and it's consistent with with your work in Chinese medicine that the ancestral energies are present, that we carry the resonance of memory from our past.
The kind of historical conditioning that comes down the family lineage comes through into the present on emotional reactions.
Right. So there are people who perhaps died tragically and they weren't grieved properly, and so the grief gets carried along and a child gets born and somehow picks up this grief. There could be a murder that took place, and so the descendant in the family will be filled with rage, may be very frightened. These kind of deep emotions that they're not really mental, they're really embedded in the body. And so we're looking from a whole body perspective to try to release them really through the heart. I mean, that seems to be where the memory most strongly resides, is in the heart. And then when you can release it, it's actually released.
So whole body perspective would mean if somebody is kind of protecting the heart area, or there are emotional consequences to relationship pain, and they're enormous. I mean, just the idea of how it ties into anxiety, and how that takes a toll, or how it ties into depression, emotional health just in general. Can you tell us a little bit about how severe it can be?
Well, relationships are a system. So if one part of the system is in trouble, it affects the other part. So, you know, couples can feed on each other. You know, a good example is a couple where one person is overweight and the other person talks about wanting to support the spouse in losing weight, but then brings home donuts and pies. And there's a reason for maintaining that system the way it is.
Yeah.
What I've found is if one person in the couple begins growing and changing, the other person either gets left behind
Yeah.
or else they have to face maybe their alcoholism
Yeah.
or their lack of motivation or something that they're enabling the other
So the
person.
dynamics get worked
Yep.
out to kind of hold these issues in a kind of a stasis, to
Yes.
hold them in some
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
of balance, even if they're inappropriate and not
Right.
working.
Usually a couple comes in and they're in some kind of distress with one another. And I'll often begin by asking them what they each expect from coming. But then, you know, complaints will start. And one question I ask that will stop a couple is, what can you do for your partner to help him or her give you what you want? So it turns the tables. Instead of saying he's doing this and he's doing that, the question is, well, what can you do? There was a study done by Consumer Report where they actually gave questionnaires to, I think, 22,000 people, a lot of people, and found that the modality, whether it's psychodynamic or cognitive or Gestalt, didn't matter so much
Yeah.
as the connection, the real rapport between the therapist and the client. So I see myself kind of as a listener
Yeah.
and a guide, sort of to help the person find their own empowerment, find their own strengths, find
Yeah.
their own self-knowledge. So it's a little different than some therapies where the therapist has the answers. For me, it's much more a listening, a deep listening,
Yeah.
understanding, and reflecting back what might be under the surface.
The statistic, about 50%
Yeah.
of marriages end in divorce.
Yeah.
If you look at the other 50%, it's not roses
Yeah.
for the other
That's a good
50%.
Right. Right.
And
That's a very good point.
there's just a very small percentage, very, very small percent, I think it's under 5% of marriages that don't have issues
Right.
Yeah.
of
Gosh, I hope I'm in that 5%.
I know, I was
I
thinking
better
that
ask my
too.
wife. I'll be
you're-
coming to
you're-
your group.
Right. You're very fortunate if you are. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a certain energy that brings people to the altar, and it doesn't last
No.
for a lifetime.
Yeah.
It
No.
dissipates over time, and
to
then
build
the
something
couple
else.
has to discover love at second sight, which takes a number of years to emerge, and very few people go through this process unscathed.
Judy,
There's
your
always
word.
hope.
Yeah, always hope.
There's hope for couples, even if they seem really distressed.
Learning new tools, way to
Absolutely.
reinvigorate, and re-nourish
Absolutely.
the relationship.
Yeah.
Probably tools that are inherent in those 5% that just works naturally, right?
Yeah.